Earthlings. So welcome along to a live stream special, and I've kind of branded it under the Animal Rights Show on the grounds that I didn't know what else to do. Plus the fact we've got Nella on board, and as you can see, we have Laura Schleifer too. So a tricky subject possibly, but we'll get into it. But it's going to be an interesting one. Thank you so much for doing this at short notice, Laura and Nella, because we only kind of put it together in the last few hours, really. In relation to the people tuning in, if you're not on my YouTube channel, that's the best place to be if you want to interact with the chat. If you're on Facebook, we will be able to see your comments, but you won't be able to see other people commenting and everything. And in terms of the chat, we don't charge people to have their comments put on the screen, so feel free to just go ahead and comment away. And if a comment comes up that we want to address, we'll put it on the screen and we'll do it there. So I think, given the unusual circumstance, Laura, I just want to ask, first of all, are you okay? How's it going?
So for me, my main concern, of course, is people that I know over in Gaza, and specifically, of course, the co-founder of the Plant the Land team, which is our vegan food justice, food sovereignty, and community projects team in Gaza. So for anyone who doesn't know, I've been working for about 5 years with a small team of local Gazan people who are basically just trying to help their own community acquire the basic necessities that they need to live, because they are under an Israeli economic blockade that has been blocking them from importing or exporting goods or even leaving or re-entering Gaza. So they need a lot of help. And so they needed a lot of help even before this current bombing campaign happened. So my main concern, of course, on a personal level is for their safety. And so specifically my co-founder, Anas Arafat, and his family. So he's been dealing with these circumstances that are going on in Gaza right now with his very pregnant wife, about 7 months pregnant, and his 2 small children, ages 2 and 4, and his parents, who they have been separated from for the last several days because Gaza City was going to be heavily bombed in their area, their neighborhood. I mean, Gaza City's been bombed since the beginning, but their neighborhood was going to be heavily bombed. And so the parents went and stayed with people in one direction, and then Anas and his family headed to another direction. And actually, Anas and his family, they were at a hospital and they were trying to stay safe there. There are no bomb shelters in Gaza at all. So there's really nowhere to go. There's nowhere to stay safe. And as I said before, they cannot leave Gaza. They are trapped in there. So they were looking for a place to stay that they thought would be safe. They were staying at this hospital. And then Israel said, we're going to bomb the hospital. And so they had to leave the hospital. And then Israel said, go south, because we're going to be bombing all of Gaza City. But, if you civilians want to clear out and save your lives, go south. So Anas and his family started heading south. And then, as some of you may have heard in the news, Israel bombed the people going south, even though that is what they told them to do to stay safe. And so I just spoke to Anas on the phone this morning, and he told me that they were just a few cars behind the buses that got bombed. So they actually saw that happening right in front of them with their very eyes. So they had to turn around, and they went back to Gaza City, and now they are staying in a room with a friend where there are 50 other people staying in this one place, and there's no protection. And Actually, I was hearing the bombs on the phone in the background towards the end of the call. And as far as their own house is concerned, it looks like their house has been destroyed. 1.1 million homes have been destroyed in Gaza. So, there's masses and masses of people now that have no housing. And so he got a message from a neighbor saying, we think that this is your house, and the house was completely demolished. But he hasn't even been able to go back there because it's too unsafe. They're still heavily bombing that area, so he can't even check to see if his house is still standing or not. And his wife's family, they also lost their housing. They were in a 5-story building that was bombed. The whole thing collapsed. Thankfully, the family made it out in time, but now they have nowhere to live. And they don't know where they're going to go, because even if the bombing ends, there's not enough housing to go around in Gaza now. It's a population of 2 million, and 1.1 million do not have housing now. So actually more than that, because that's how many homes were destroyed, but you have multiple people living in each home. So yeah, it is just an absolute catastrophe. And the other issue that they're really severely dealing with right now, well, two things actually. First of all is that they have no blankets, and it's freezing because they have no fuel for heat. They have no electricity. Israel has cut them off, blocked all of them. And also they have no water. And that is all over Gaza. I've been seeing messages from people saying, we need water, please, we need water. Anas just told me again this morning, we have no water. And Israel said they were going to allow some water in, and then they just changed their mind, and now they have no water in Gaza. So, it is just like an absolute disaster on many levels. And it's kind of like, their lives are threatened not just from one thing, but from many different things. They could die of dehydration. They could die from being bombed. They could die of hypothermia. It is just absolutely severe. So that is the situation. And obviously, I am gravely worried and praying for all of their safety, everyone in Gaza. And I'm just praying for this to end.
Yeah, we are talking about one of the most densely populated parts of the planet, aren't we here? And because I know for people who don't know, they were given 24 hours to move south, as you said. So the Gaza Strip has been really kind of split into two now. So the north part and the south part, and all the people in the north part, which is the majority of them, because that's where Gaza City is, were told to go south, as you said. And then the hospital that you talked about, I think they were given like 2 hours notice,
Yes.
Something like that. So it is, it's hard really. We're sat here with our computers and electricity and a cup of tea and stuff. It's very kind of difficult to get your head around that. One question I was going to ask you, actually, but Deb has done it for me, Laura, is is the border into Egypt open? It was supposed to be, but
so it is not open. They're trying to get the Egyptians to open the border. But the thing is, the Egyptians' reason for not wanting to open the border is because they're saying, well, if we open that border, what's going to happen is that all of these refugees for Gaza are going to pour into Egypt, and then that border is going to be sealed closed, and those refugees will never be able to go back to Gaza. And there's a lot of reason to think that this is probably the case because, Israel, they want more of that land. They want all of that land. And so, this very well may be a way of clearing the people out of that land so that they can then take it and make it part of Israel. And there is a big history of this happening in the past many times, starting with what they call the Nakba, which is the Arabic word for catastrophe. And, all of these Palestinians left, during the creation of the state of Israel, thinking that they would be able to come back. And then they were never allowed back, and they're still living as refugees in many cases. You have refugee camps in that part of the world and the surrounding countries that have been there since 1948, with people still living as refugees. So that's why, Egypt is hesitant to do that. And certainly, I know the Palestinians, obviously, they want to get out of Gaza to save their lives, but I think they know that doing so would risk that they would just be giving up Gaza to Israel.
Do you think that the part of the problem and the reason the whole world is divided at this moment is because most people conflate the Israeli government position with the general Israeli population position, which is not the same. And I would like you to explain that a little, because Netanyahu is not the Israeli people and Hamas is not the Palestinian people. And it's problematic when we overgeneralize and we attribute these motives to everyone. Because as you explained, there are very many Israeli people that are against the Israeli tactics right now.
So there are definitely a lot of Israelis who are against the Netanyahu government, and that is for a number of reasons. First of all, they were already opposing the Netanyahu government because that is a very far-right government. And what's happening is that basically it's not just what that government is doing to the Palestinians, but rather that they are taking away civil liberties within Israel. So it's affecting the Israeli population, not just the Palestinian population. And so Israelis, have been really kind of up in arms about that, about kind of seeing their government turning more and more into an overt theocracy and, and legalizing that, entrenching that in the law. So there was already a lot of pushback against that administration. Now, what's happening now is that since the horrifying events of this past week, Israelis are even more angry at the Netanyahu administration, because what happened was, normally the quote unquote border, but it's really not a border because these are not, to recognize, separate countries. Israel controls Gaza, but there's, what they call the Green Line, which is basically like a border between Gaza and Israel. So normally there are Israeli soldiers surrounding that Green Line. And what happened was Netanyahu took those soldiers away and put them in the Israeli occupied Palestinian West Bank. And the West Bank, there are already many Israeli soldiers in there, but of course the West Bank is where they are grabbing more and more Palestinian land. So he wanted pretty much all the Israeli soldiers to be in the West Bank so that they could take more land there. And so he left that Green Line border area unguarded pretty much between Gaza and Israel. And then he got a message from the Egyptians saying, we have some word that Hamas is planning something. They're planning to attack you. And he did not put those soldiers back. He just ignored that warning and he left Israel open and exposed in that way. And so, if you listen to like some of these reports that are coming out of the people that were at that Israeli music festival, for example, they're saying we were totally on our own to deal with this situation for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. And the only help that we had was from other civilians. There was no one there to help us in terms of official protective forces. So, yeah, they're very, very angry at the Netanyahu government. But having said all of that, the question of are they opposed to the Netanyahu government specifically for what it's doing to the Palestinians? that's another story, because, you know, there's a lot of anger, obviously, in Israel right now, a lot of anger. But even before that, you know, I mean, I hate to say this, but like attacks on Gaza have high approval ratings within Israel, so much so that, you know, sometimes the Israeli government will, you know, like they'll bomb Gaza before an election because they know that that will work up fervor of support for that political party, because they're showing their, you know, their military might and their prowess. So, you know, I mean, I'm not, there are some people that, you know, do care about what Israel is doing to the Palestinians, and I have nothing but the highest respect for them. And it's very hard for them, even under normal circumstances, let alone now, to make that statement, because, you know, it's not a popular statement in Israel. And especially now that, you know, Israelis feel like they've been severely attacked, there's really not a lot of patience for that. So it takes a lot of bravery to make that statement in Israel right now, I would say.
It seems that you have a right-wing government on one side, you have the fundamentalists on the other, and this is a recipe for disaster. Because how could you put these two sides on a table to find a solution? It seems like.
Yeah, I mean, I am not from that part of the world, so, you know, I can't speak especially for Palestinians on this, but as a Jewish person who Israel claims to speak for, because of course they claim that they represent the interests of all Jews all around the world, you know, I think that, so basically, you know, I kind of started talking about the situation with the two-state solution and why that's really not, certainly not a fair solution, and I would say not even a realistic solution, because you have, you know, that little tiny, so we're talking about that 22% is the Palestinian territories, and 78% of what was originally Palestine is now Israel. So, you know, right there, you're starting with this like massive imbalance. But then on top of that, you've got hundreds of thousands of Israeli settlers in the Palestinian West Bank. And, you know, they have like their settlements, and they have like, you know, this whole sort of like apartheid system of, you know, separate kind of like cities and roads connecting the settlements to the cities. Like there's this whole thing that is for the settlers. And so in order even to have you know, just Palestinians in the West Bank, you'd have to remove all those settlers who do not want to go and who very much feel that that's all their land. So, you know, it's like Palestine is just broken up into little bits and pieces, the Palestinian territories. Gaza is nowhere near the West Bank. You'd have to cross through Israel to get from one to the other. And then even the West Bank itself is broken up by all these settlements. So that's basically, you know, the two-state solution is basically Israel gets the 78% plus all the settlements, and then Palestine gets little tiny fragments of pieces of land. I mean, that's just, you know, that's not going to work. So that's one thing. And then, of course, some people are talking about what's called a one-state solution, and that would be one single state, but a binational state. So kind of like Canada, you know how they have like French Canada and English Canada, but they're all one country and they have one central government and it's equal rights for all. And, you know, certainly that seems in some ways more reasonable. However, then you're going to have the issue of who is going to control the government, because, you know, if it's the Israelis that are voted in, then the Palestinians are basically just living under Israel fully. That's basically Israel taking over the entire country, and there's no Palestine. And then, of course, you know, if it's the Palestinians in charge of the government, then the Jews are going to have to live under a Muslim government, and they don't want that. So there's complications with that too. The third thing would be, and this I personally would say would be like really the ideal, but again, I'm not there and I can't make, that's not my decision to make, but there are some people talking about what they would call a no state solution. And that's basically no, central overarching government, but basically just communities that are self-governing, that have, their own system, and basically kind of just living side by side, peacefully, we hope, but no overarching system. So that would be, another thing. There's the Kurds in Rojava, in neighboring Syria, they're doing something like that in a system that they call democratic confederalism. That's a communalist system. So that's something else. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of different ways that it could go.
I wanted to ask you a bit of a deep dive into the historical side of this issue, because depending on where you start your analysis, it seems to maybe bring a different outcome, and it also, in relation to even the names that you might use, some people will say there's never been a Palestine, and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So
right.
I've been watching quite a lot of commentators over the last week or so. People like Chomsky and people like Jeremy Corbyn have been talking, but also people on the other side of the spectrum like Melanie Phillips and this kind of stuff. But so I want to ask you a question about that. But first of all, can I just, we've got a bit of pushback here. So Carl's position is he makes 3 points. Israel doesn't want Gaza. And then 2, Egypt was given the option to annex the land in the past and they didn't want it. 2nd. And then 3, nobody wants Gaza because of the terrorists running Gaza.
Well, no one is saying that they want Gaza with Hamas in Gaza.
No.
I mean, it's not that I'm saying that they want Gaza in the current system and with the current population. What I'm saying is that it is highly likely that they want the land of Gaza. Gaza is, right on the beach. It could be beautiful beachfront property. It has a lot going for it. So, and, again, they are taking over more and more land in East Jerusalem, and they are taking over more and more land in the West Bank. In fact, this year, they have taken over more land in those parts of the Palestinian territories than they ever have in the past. So, the chances that they want Gaza, as in the land of Gaza, I think are pretty significant. So let's see. And then, I have to say also something about this whole idea of the terrorists that are running Gaza. I was very shocked. So first of all, Hamas is the government of Gaza. For people who do not know this, they are the political party that is in power. They have been in power since 2006. They were elected to power at that time, but there has not been an election since then. And this was really shocking. But first of all, it turns out that Israel was involved in creating Hamas back in 1988. And the reason why they did that was because, and this has been reported in the mainstream news. I mean, this is in the Wall Street Journal. This is in the Washington Post. This is not conspiracy theorism. I know it sounds like it is, but they did that because at the time, the Palestinian party that was really powerful was the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and they wanted to weaken the PLO. And so they thought that by supporting this rival party, they could use a divide and conquer strategy, and then that kind of blew up in their face in the end. The other thing about Hamas is I was very shocked to read this morning, but Michael Moore just put out a statement saying that it is being reported in the Israeli media that actually the Netanyahu government has been secretly meeting with Hamas all this time, And that the reason why is because, again, they're trying to divide Hamas from the PLO, which is now they're called Fatah, which is the party in the West Bank. So, it's like, can you call them a terrorist organization? Well, I think you can if you call political parties terrorist organizations, then maybe you can, right? I mean, but I don't see how, but they're not in the sense that people think. They're not in the sense that they're this sort of like extrajudicial operation that, is hiding somewhere. Like, it's not that sort of situation, the way that people think when they use that term usually.
The issue there, Laura, is obviously the music festival attack.
Yeah.
Democracy Now! Have been calling it their surprise attack, and there is a lot of evidence that a lot of Israelis were quite shocked because, as you were saying before, the power imbalance between the two is so large that the Israelis didn't ever think that anything of this kind of scale could ever kind of happen. Iron Dome and all the infrastructure of security and everything. So I think there's an element of shock, and I think it's a kind of generational thing as well, in the sense that they seem to, people a bit longer in the tooth have got a longer perspective, but the younger generation of Israelis, they never expected this, never thought it would happen.
Right.
And so for them, this is just a terrorist attack out of the blue, right?
Yeah, you're right. They never expected this to happen. And that is exactly for the reason you said, because there is this massive power imbalance. And so, it's kind of like the rest of the world, or the Western world, I'll say, the way the media portrays this, it often seems like Israel is, really being seriously threatened by Hamas. But really, what you said speaks to the fact that they haven't really been that harmed by Hamas. Now, I'm not saying that that's, because Hamas has chosen to, not harm them, but just because they have not had the capacity. They don't have that kind of power. They send those rockets over. Everybody goes on about the Hamas rockets. The Hamas rockets are like, little handmade things that, they don't even explode a lot of the time. They just kind of like land. And then that's the end of that. And, if you look at like the statistics on the deaths on the Palestinian side versus the Israeli side, up until now, it's been like 100 to 1. And I'm not exaggerating. It's been 100 Palestinian deaths, maybe to 1 Israeli death, sometimes even greater margins than that. So this is very unheard of. It is the biggest attack to happen since the Yom Kippur War in 1973. And, basically, yes, the Israelis were taken by complete shock because they were living in a position of feeling relative safety.
But it's a terrorist tactic, though. Attack because they attacked civilians. They didn't attack the army.
Yeah,
so,
right.
No matter how I see that, it was a terrorist attack.
Yeah, I have to say that the civilian to army binary is much more complicated in Israel than it is in most countries because, of course, in Israel, there is a universal draft where pretty much every young person, both women and men and other genders, they all have to join the military and they all have to do their military service. And of course, in Israel, military service means serving in the Palestinian territories and controlling and subjugating the Palestinians. So that is a strange situation because that means that pretty much the entire population of Israel either has served in the military or will serve in the military or is currently serving in the military. And if you refuse to serve in the military, you will go to jail. And some people go to jail for up to 10 years for refusing to serve in the military there. And also, even after they get out, they have all kinds of other issues because they don't get like an identification card that you need there to be able to get a job and housing. And, you know, it just really causes them a lot of problems throughout their lives. So because of that, number one, it's a very, very militaristic society because everyone has been in the military and, you know, has been pumped full of that sort of, you know, military brainwashing propaganda sort of thing. And number two, of course, the Palestinians have a hard time seeing Israelis as just civilians because they know that practically all of them serve in the military. So, you know, I would say that most likely they attacked that music festival because it was full of young people who were of military age and therefore probably were in the military, but were off duty, which, you know, I'm not saying that that makes it okay to do something like that, but I'm just saying that that binary is not the same there like it is in other countries.
Yeah. Also, having a music festival, actually having a party near like the largest prison of the world, it's deeply problematic. That does not mean though that you should be bombed.
No, I agree with that, Nella. But that was the point that I wanted to develop with Laura, in the sense that I think you're right about the kind of, you know, close connection because of conscription between the military and the population. There is that, and Nella's point that, you know, these people are kind of partying just down the road from where these things are going, and it reminded me of those days when you used to get a lot of vegan celebrities going to Israel, and they would put their kind of films out about them, you know, eating vegan cupcakes and everything, without saying anything about the political situation, just as it were down the road. Yeah. And from Hamas's point of view, then, you know, you've got the Israeli population partying just up the road. You've got people flying in to join, right, in the way that the vegan celebrities. So from their point, they suddenly become almost like legitimate targets. And I think there's another element to it. I'm really interested in this because I wrote a chapter in my PhD about dehumanization processes. And I know that Benny Malone put a post out which you liked about that. And yeah, and of course we do know that the Israeli commanders are calling the Palestinian human animals, right? Now, obviously, there's a deep kind of irony there from a vegan point of view, but from a mainstream point of view, you're just calling them animals. I mean, we can debate why they chose that phrase, human animals, rather than just animals, which they normally do, and this kind of stuff. Right. So they felt that they would dehumanize them, and then also they tend to see all Palestinians as combatants. And so they were saying that everybody in Gaza City is responsible for Hamas because they don't rise up against them. But half of those people are children. Right? So,
and also, go ahead. I have a question on your question.
Yeah. So I was thinking whether the reverse could be true. And in terms of dehumanization, there's an element of that within Hamas as well, that they dehumanize the Israelis. And so, you know, I mean, from the Israeli point of view, there's a terrible, terrible, terrible echo of what the Third Reich did, which was to see what they were doing as vermin control, which is kind of what's going on now, because they're talking about, oh, it's not about accuracy, it's about just leveling the place, it's about clearing the ground, and it's about killing all these animals, right? Now, you know, if Hamas has the same attitude, then they've got no respect for each other. And so that in itself would say, well, we can just attack any part of the population. It doesn't really matter. Whereas obviously from the West, to put it that way, everybody's going, wow, you know, a music festival, what a terrible thing to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know whether any of that makes any sense to you or not.
Well, certainly, yeah. I mean, anytime you hear this sort of language of animalization, that's a big sign that there is persecution going on and that there is genocide, you know, pending. I mean, it happens in every single war situation or oppression situation that there's animalization going on. And of course, that is to take away any compassion towards the person, or, you know, really seeing them as having any value, and also identification, right? This idea of, I see myself in you. I see your suffering mirrors mine. So, oh, we can't have that. You know, when you're having a war or when you're oppressing a population, you can't have that, because if you started to think that way, then you would have to open your heart to that other individual. And the animalization is a tool that is used to shut that door and to make that other look, you know, just so different from you, and you know, not worthy of any rights or protection or care. So, you know, I mean, it's like, on the one hand, you've got the Israelis doing it, and they are the oppressors of the Palestinians. They are the ones that have all the power. Like you said, there's this massive power differential. And so therefore, to look at the reasons why Hamas is doing it versus the Israeli government, you have to take that into consideration. So the Israelis, of course, it's, you know, like you said, clean out the vermin, right? They are beneath us. They are roaches. They are, you know, just get rid of them, right? Whereas I would say with Hamas, it might be more a situation of they are the enemy, and you can't see your enemy as human or as having value, or not. Yeah, you can't see your enemy as basically someone that you in some way empathize with or relate to, because if you did, then you wouldn't be able to go into that zone of intense focus and compartmentalization. So yeah, I'm seeing the comment. Right. So I mean, it's this really intense tool of separation that is used, and of course, that all comes from this origin idea of we are separate from the rest of the animal species. So that's the origin point, is this idea of separation in that way, and then it's used to separate human from human. And you have that in the oppression context, and you also have that in the war context.
There is another way this the word animal is used right now in this context. You have what Israel says, and the Israeli government says, and what the Hamas probably is saying. But there are a number of journalists, people in the West in general, describing Palestinians as animals, meaning describing actually Hamas as animals because of the atrocities they committed. But we've never seen non-human animals commit atrocities.
Yes.
Yeah, that scale, that champion. But this is something that has been said for centuries. When something that cruel is observed, we call someone an animal. I think the word animal is used in two different ways right now in this context. My question is, going back to the politics of the area. So if the Israeli government wants like the whole land, what does Hamas want? Because I think it's oversimplifying to say that Hamas just wants Palestinians to have rights and be free, because Hamas is not Fatah. There haven't been an election since 2007. Fatah was very close in percentages back then, if I remember correctly. It was like 41, 42%. And they are the more liberal part of the Palestinian people. So from what you hear, from what we read, of course, and what you hear from the Palestinians, where do they stand on the whole Hamas thing?
I mean, I think that Hamas wants the Palestine to be for the Palestinians. And when I say Palestine to be for the Palestinians, we do have to remember that prior to 1948, all of that land was Palestine. So, you know, they want that to go back to the Palestinians. You know, if they had their choice, I'm sure that's what they would want. I don't think they're trying to take over land beyond historic Palestine. But I do think that they would want that to go back to the Palestinians. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because you know, we've probably all seen those maps where Palestine is picked out in green, and then there's another one where everything starts to get fragmented, and then there's hardly anything left and everything, right? But
Yeah.
What would you say to those historians or those commentators who actually say that it's Palestine itself that's a fiction, not?
Yeah, I can answer that one. So first of all, I just want to kind of add something to my last comment, which is that while I think, you know, if you're asking like the ultimate desire of Hamas would be to have it be Palestine, they have said in the past, I don't know if their position on this has changed, but basically they have said that, you know, they would back off if it were just that Israel pulled out of Gaza and the West Bank and East Jerusalem. So, you know, I think their immediate goal would be for Israel to stop the blockade on Gaza, which has been imprisoning Gazans in that little tiny strip of land since 2006, and putting these incredibly harsh sanctions where they're starving them. You know, they're making it impossible for them to get food in there, get you know, to have electricity, to have, you know, the basic necessities of life. You know, and then also to pull out of the West Bank, where, of course, the Palestinians there have been living, and East Jerusalem, where they've been living under Israeli apartheid and military occupation since 1967. So, you know, that would be their immediate goal. So even though I'm saying that, you know, when you're saying what does Hamas want? Well, I think they really would want all of Palestine, you know, historic Palestine, to be Palestinian. I think that they would, you know, just their immediate goal would be to just get Israel to get out of the Palestinian territories and stop controlling them. As far as, well, Palestine, you know, didn't exist, this sort of thing. So this is a big Zionist talking point. Of course, the Zionists are the ones who, you know, wanted to create the Israeli state in the first place. And so what happened there was, yes, of course, that land has gone through many name changes, right? Originally, it was ancient Canaan, or some people say Canaan, and then you had the Kingdom of Israel, and you had the, you know, Judea, and you had Samaria, which the hardline Zionists still call the Palestinian West Bank. They call it Judea and Samaria. They won't even call it the West Bank. And you had, you know, all these different changes, but it was started to be called Palestine 2,000 roughly years ago. And it was called Palestine ever since then, up until 1948. And what happened was, the reason they say that is because there was the Ottoman Empire for 500 years. So that was the Turks. And under the Ottoman Empire, the entire, what we now call the Middle East, was under the Ottoman Empire. And so you didn't have separate countries. You had regions with names, but they were not nation states because they were under the overall control of the Ottoman Empire. So Palestine was its own region, and you could see it on a map. You know, you see maps with Palestine, you see coins with the name Palestine, you know, so it was, for all intents and purposes, you it certainly existed. There's no doubt about that. Even the Zionists themselves referred to it as Palestine up until the creation of the State of Israel. So there is no doubt that there was a Palestine, but it did not conform to European conceptions of nation states. And actually, even in Europe, the modern day conception of the nation state is really a pretty new thing. So basically, that's just a manipulative way to deny the existence of Palestine to advance a Zionist agenda.
Yes.
Okay, I feel that we have to address something in the chat. Do you wanna do it, Laura, or I should just say what's on my mind? I'll read it, then you can comment. The culture has a lot of cruelty in their ritual practices, such as kosher killing. And I assume this is about the Jewish culture. And I just want to say that it's not the Jewish culture that has cruelty in their ritual, because I can think of Muslim practices, of Christian practices. Actually, all religions have cruel practices related to animals and to other animals and to humans sometimes. That's not a Jewish thing. I just felt that we had to.
Yeah, absolutely. That is not specific to the Jews by any means. And, we just live in a culture of cruelty to animals. We live in a culture of cruelty to humans. We live in a world of, a lot of cruelty. And so, and just again, like this sort of otherization and this sort of, shutting off our empathy. So, yeah, that is certainly not specific to Jews by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, I think you'd probably find it hard to come up with a league table of the most, the cultures with the most rights violations, or, the most exploitation and all that in it. I mean, I think the British might top the charts in many ways for a start off, just even thinking about their sports, like fox hunting and stuff. And so, that bottom part about these behaviors are taught to their children. Well, that's true. I mean, this is socialization, and this is the problem, which is why cultural speciesism is our main problem, is the fact that it's taught generationally, and we do pass on these values, and another complication, of course, with that is that animal welfareism is kind of entangled into cultural speciesism. And so it's kind of, well, we can exploit them, but we shouldn't be cruel. We should try not to be, or and all that kind of stuff. And so, but I mean, in that sense, that's a sociological point that, all cultures get transmitted generationally, and all the practices within them, get trans. I mean, obviously there's change, there's resistance and stuff, but generally speaking, there's this kind of generational transfer. Yeah. So there is that.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say also, just if I had to make a general comment about, cultures and their dismissal of seeing non-human animals as subjects in their own right, I would say that really colonialism plays a major role in that, because and I could say patriarchy too, but colonialism, and obviously capitalism is kind of like the ultimate expression of that. But colonialism is very significant in this way because, when you have an indigenous population, they have a long history with the nature and the other animals of that land, for thousands of years. And then colonizers come in and they're kind of looking at everything and everyone as, how can I profit off of this? How can I exploit this? So, you can say that there are, issues with this in every human population, but I would say that there's a difference between the colonizer perspective on the other animals and the land, and the humans that are originally there. They don't see them as fellow equals that, live side by side they see them as, we are the dominator and we're here to take advantage of everything that we can and everyone that we can in this place.
Yeah, instrumental reason. Could I maybe take you back to this, just so kind of lighten the mood a little bit in a sense, because I mean, obviously this topic is very heavy and also developing in the sense that the kind of ground offensive was announced within 24 hours and then it's been delayed. And there's some really interesting commentaries about why that might be, because of the domino effect of it, if they do what they say they're going to do, which is really genocidal, then that's going to bring in not only more support for Hamas, but also Hezbollah, and then on it will go until you end up with a regional conflict going on or something. But in terms of what's on the screen then, so this is the land team that you talked about earlier. And so can you just say, because I was asking before we came on about the plant the land, so it's kind of like an immediate aid situation, but also they're then trying to create kind of food through growing for the future, as it were. Yeah.
Right. So yes. So just to kind of like reiterate, so Gaza has been called the world's biggest open air prison or concentration camp by major human rights organizations like Amnesty International. And basically, they have a major food crisis even in general. So not just during this current bombing campaign or, but like just on an ongoing basis for 17 years, they've been dealing with this. And they can't import, they can't export. They're also in a desert. So they can't, they really have a hard time growing food there, even under the best of circumstances. And then they're dealing with this sort of situation on top of it. So what happened was, my friend Anas in Gaza, he is a local Gazan, but he was really trying to help his community. And I found out about him through the Free Palestine movement that I was involved with. And I saw the good work that he was doing just in general. And then at that time, I was getting a lot of requests from Palestinians begging for food. And they were saying, oh, can you please send some money so that I can get some food for my family because we are starving. And I was seeing all of the really amazing food justice work that was going on in the vegan community, and I was very inspired by that. And then I thought, well, Gaza really needs something like that. And so I reached out to Anas, and the big Muslim holiday of Ramadan was coming up. So I thought, well, what if we did a vegan food fundraiser for Ramadan? So I reached out to Anas, and it just randomly turned out that he is vegetarian, which is very rare in Gaza because, again, as I said, they are starving. So, it's pretty hard to turn down anything that could be edible. But he is a vegetarian, and he was really enthusiastic about wanting to do this. And, I was thinking this is a great way to help Gaza and also make it possible for vegans to help Gaza and know that they didn't need to worry about any of their money being used for exploiting or killing animals. So that is how we ended up starting Plant the Land team, was with that first fundraiser. And then Anas had the idea to create a team of volunteers, and that they would do these ongoing emergency food distributions where they would buy and distribute food, but also plant food for the future. And that's especially important in a place like Gaza because, again, they can't import and export. So being able to plant their own food makes them more food sovereign. So, and then he said, we can also help with other things that people in the community need, like medicine or water wells, or blankets or things like that. So we thank you so much. so we started working on that. And, as he was talking, he was telling me about these ideas that he had. And he said, we'll do all these things and plant the land. And as soon as I heard him say that, I said, that is the name of the team. That's such a perfect name, Plant the Land Team. And I just thought it had, so many symbolic meanings as well, of planting the seeds of peace and planting the seeds for a better future. And, just a lot of beautiful things, even, in terms of like the spiritual significance of that land, so I just thought, yeah, that would be a great name for it. Yeah. Oh, I see. There's a list of survival foods here. Yeah, I mean, a lot of those, they may not be able to grow in Gaza. I don't know. But, they're planting everything that they can. And they plant on public lands. And then sometimes they'll work out an agreement with a farmer and they'll plant on the farmer's land and they'll help the farmers that way. So that's basically what Plant the Land Team is. And we've been doing this for about 5 years now. And, what's really great about it is that it is the most direct, as they say, mutual aid project. So there's no overhead expenses, it's 100%, every single penny goes directly to the team in Gaza. And then it is local people, the local Gazans that are managing everything, that are organizing everything, that are distributing everything. So there's no way that it can just kind of like get lost in the system. So yeah, that's basically what we've been doing. And we have helped many, many families. And I do also want to really give a big shout out to 2 organizations that helped us, which was, they used to be called $1 Million Vegan, and now they've changed their name to Generation Vegan, and also Vegan Compassion Group in the UK. And they actually came to us. We didn't even have to ask them. Those 2 organizations came to us. Generation Vegan, $1 Million Vegan, they came right after the big bombing, the last big bombing in 2019. And they said, we want to donate, I think it was like 3,000 vegan meals to Gazans in need. And then a few years later, Vegan Compassion Group came to us and they said, we want to fund some planting of food. And the really tragic thing is that, as I was just telling Roger before we started this live stream, literally just like a day or 2 before this massive bombing campaign broke out and Hamas attacked Israel, right before that, Anas had sent me some photos of the olive trees that they had planted, and how symbolic, olive trees, the branch of peace, right? And so he had sent me these photos of the olive trees that they had planted with the money from Vegan Compassion Project. And he said, oh, look, they've grown up, they're starting to bear fruit, please share these, please tell Vegan Compassion Group and share the photos with them and say we thank them so much. And then this broke out right after that. And of course, now those trees are probably getting destroyed with the bombs, with everything else.
It's a real tragedy, isn't it? That's a real tragedy part of it, isn't it? Actually, Deb's got a question about the water. I mean, this is water is a problem for everybody at the moment, and in fact, there's a lot of talk now about desalination projects not being able to keep going because of the fuel situation, and a lot of sewage and stuff in the water system now. So we're now going to start seeing diseases starting to arise, but also, I mean, I don't know if this is a related thing, but is there an irrigation system there for watering the food, crops, plants? Do you know how it's done?
I mean, I'm assuming there probably is, but the thing is that everything they try to build is then destroyed by Israel, because every time they have a bombing campaign like this, they destroy everything they've built. So, the plumbing, the irrigation system, the power plant, that was bombed in 2014 and they never got to rebuild it. Not that I'm a fan of nuclear power, but Gaza needs electricity. They've never been able to rebuild those things because they cannot import the materials that they would need to rebuild them because of the Israeli blockade and sanctions on Gaza. So the water system has just been getting worse and worse because, again, there's all this destruction every time they get bombed, and then they can't rebuild it. So even before this happened, like 90% of Gaza, I think, lacked sufficient clean water. And already that was a huge crisis in Gaza. And this is like really appalling. But during this bombing campaign, everybody knows that Gaza is lacking water. And then the journalist Sean King from the Daily News, which is, big newspaper in New York, he posted images of somebody caught the Israeli soldiers pouring concrete into the Gazan water pipes to stop them from even having access to the water that they did have. So, the water system is just absolutely, it was already a disaster before this happened. And now they're destroying even more of it. Of course, they need electricity to be able to pull the water from the wells. They have no electricity now, so they can't draw out the water. And again, they're on a desert, so they already have water shortages to begin with. And then, when I spoke to Anas this morning, he said to me, after this, many people are going to get cancer and die from that because the water is going to be poisoned with depleted uranium bombs, leaking material, with white phosphorus bombs, all of this radiation that's there now, that's going to poison all the water. So, yeah, the water situation is beyond dire.
Yeah, I saw a film of the soldiers filling in wells with concrete. And also, of course, you probably saw this, that there was some guy, looked like in his 20s, Israeli guy, posted on something like TikTok where he was kind of drinking from his fountain and switching his lights on and off and everything, and it was just to kind of taunt the the Palestinians, really. And apparently that went viral. But one question I wanted to ask about, you mentioned the groups that have been funding this project, and I don't know whether the $1 million one is the same one that offered the money to Trump and to the Pope.
Yes.
Really? Oh, really? Okay.
So apparently there was somebody else in charge at the time when they were going around offering Trump and the Pope $1 million to whatever.
The richest MP in Britain. But
yeah.
If everything is so controlled over there, is it a problem just giving money to a group like this?
Like Plant the Land?
Yeah.
Yes. It has been difficult to get the money over there. And that has been a challenge that I have been dealing with from the very beginning. And actually, we had a method that seemed pretty stable and secure up until this bombing started, and then they shut down that. So it's been really hard to get the aid in there. And that is actually the situation that we're dealing with right now, because everybody wants to help. And meanwhile, it's like, it's of course, Anas keeps saying we need the money. And, he says he can't take the money out right now because they bombed 3 banks. And there's no way to actually withdraw the money. But he says, well, if I can just show, that it's in my account, then they will, I can get the supplies that I need for the community, blankets and food and, what people need. And then, I can just pay the sellers later. But yeah, it's very difficult, even under normal circumstances, to get aid into Gaza, and right now it's virtually impossible.
Yeah, is it very bureaucratic? Do you have to prove where the money's going to? Because obviously they wouldn't want Hamas to be getting it, right? And so there must be
Yeah.
a lot of controls, right?
Yeah, I mean, what was happening is that, we were doing it through PayPal, and PayPal would hold the money sometimes for weeks at a time to check that out. And then it was kind of funny, but like I would get this letter from somebody with an Israeli sounding name. And, Avi or whoever would say, okay, we looked into it and it's legit. And then they would release it. And on the one hand, that was like really frustrating that it was not getting into Gaza when they needed it. But on the other hand, I was kind of like, well, they've cleared it. So that must mean that they feel like it's above board and, that it's not going to come back like, oh, it went into the wrong hands and this sort of thing. So, but yeah, I mean, you're right. It's a huge, huge issue. And I think that this is probably the biggest reason why you don't have more organizations helping Gaza.
Laura, on top of all the horrific images we've seen lately, I've seen images of dead animals, non-human animals, in the Gaza. Do you know what's the situation with strays, with sanctuaries? Have you heard anything? I know that there are several, organizations urging the Israeli government to not bomb the sanctuaries, but
yeah, I mean, so like, first of all, just this whole thing about these organizations that are urging the Israeli government, oh, don't bomb the animal shelters or sanctuaries. I mean, I'm kind of like appalled though that they are not saying don't bomb at all,
Yes, period. I mean, don't bomb. Yes.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, it's like, oh, just make sure you avoid the non-human animals. It's okay to bomb the humans, just be careful where you bomb, that you don't bomb anyone who's not human. But yes, I mean, obviously, huge, enormous, horrendous suffering to non-human animals. And, I wrote an article for Force of Vegan magazine that looked at the whole animal rights movement and vegan movement in both Israel and Palestine. And I really searched to find out, yeah, there's the article. And I really searched to find out what there was for the non-human animals in Gaza, because, I mean, the West Bank is really, they're suffering. They have a horrible situation too, but Gaza is like really dire. And so I was like, are people even going to have the bandwidth to be able to do much of anything for the non-human animals? And so there is one animal rescue, and I guess you could say kind of a small sanctuary organization that I found, which is a truly amazing organization. And I would strongly support everyone to really put them out there, amplify what they're doing. And they're called Sulala Animal, I think it's Sulala Animal Society. And they specifically go out and try to rescue the animals that are injured and harmed during bombings. And I remember one story in particular that really affected me, where they were talking about this dog, and the building was being bombed, and I think it was just the bombs outside, but the dog was so terrified that he jumped out the window because he was so scared. And so they were treating that dog. And so, I mean, even the emotional impact, obviously on the humans, but also on the non-humans, of the terror of this, Sulala really takes that into consideration as well. So they are a wonderful organization.
We make a big fuss about fireworks, right? I mean,
no kidding. That's what I think about every time people talk about the fireworks. I'm like, God, if we're like fussing over them being scared of fireworks, how do you think they feel when they're in an actual war zone where there are bombs coming down? Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, you mentioned white phosphorus. That would be incredibly damaging for other animals as much as human ones, of course. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, white phosphorus is internationally banned. but the Israelis and the US use it all the time. And what is so exceptionally horrible about it is that it burns whoever it hits to death, and there is no way to put out the fire.
Yeah, it's kind of almost like an acid, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
just
like
kind
an acid burn, right? Exactly. I mean, it's
yeah.
really severe.
So I'll just show people, this quite a long, in fact, they reckon it's a 36-minute read. So it's a very detailed article, as you can see. Also, we did have a very early, comment about something which is relevant to this, which is this one here. So you do cover the kind of Yurovsky issue in this article, don't you? So that's one thing that is a feature of this particular article. I have put the link in the chat so people can check it out. Okay, so we're over an hour, so maybe we can just go back to talking through these to finish off with. The picture on the left there reminds me very much of Dublin. You see these kind of scenes all the time in Dublin. Sadly, it's very kind of old-fashioned in that way. But so yeah, working donkey, I think, was the.
You see them in the Greek islands every day. It's horrific.
Yeah,
and places where you have alternatives, you have the means, you have everything, and yet they think it's cynic or whatever.
Yeah, I will say that in Gaza, not many people have cars there, or like a lot of times they don't have the vehicles that they would have in a wealthier society. So, yes, of course, you are going to have a lot more non-human animals exploited for their labor under those circumstances.
Laura, can you deal with that? How can people support the organization you're mentioning with great difficulty, it sounds like, but what would you suggest?
Yeah, there's actually something that just came out where they did have a fundraiser for Sulala. So maybe I can put that, we can put that in the comments underneath the video. But yes, they are taking donations right now.
That's great.
Okay. So there is that then. And then the picture on the right is a sanctuary called Daily Hugs, I believe.
Right. So, yes, that is Daily Hugs Sanctuary. That is in the West Bank. And that's Maud, who is the founder of the sanctuary. And he created the sanctuary and called it Daily Hugs because on the one hand, he wanted to, of course, give a sanctuary to the non-human animals. But he also had a second goal, which was to kind of reintroduce Palestinians, and especially Palestinian children, to non-human animals in a friendly, safe way where they could kind of reconnect with their empathy for non-human animals and not be afraid of them and get comfort from them. Because basically a lot of Palestinians, they are introduced to, especially animals like dogs and especially German shepherds, through the Israeli occupying military exploiting those animals to terrorize the Palestinians with. And so they have this great fear of them. So Maud wanted to create a space. Huh?
They're used as attack dogs.
Used as attack dogs, right, exactly. So Maud wanted to create a space where the children could meet the German shepherds and other animals and, feel safe with them and connect with them in a different way and reframe their understanding of them through that experience.
And do you have any intel about whether they're okay or anything like that?
Well, they're in the West Bank, so they are not being bombed. They're not in Gaza. But of course, the West Bank is also under a terrible situation right now because the Israelis have been taking more and more land in the West Bank. And, they've got all their military in the West Bank. I mean, they always do, but, the military's been more aggressive in terms of that. And then on top of that, something even more horrendous has been going on since this whole situation happened with Hamas and Gaza, which is that the Israeli military usually, they're there to protect the settlers and their interests. That's, of course, the Israeli settlers in the apartheid settlements. But they do also serve a role in restraining the Israeli settlers from attacking the Palestinians, because those settlers, a lot of them are these far right-wingers who come from other parts of the world, specifically because they believe that that is their land. And, that it was given to them by God, it's theirs by divine right. And so they really are like far right-wing extremists who attack the Palestinians on an ongoing basis in hate crimes. And so usually the Israeli military plays somewhat of a restraining role in that scenario. And then since this broke out in Gaza, they have basically said, have at them, go attack the Palestinians if you want. And I've even heard reports of them giving the settlers weapons, but the settlers are very heavily armed to begin with. So yes, the people in the West Bank are in grave danger right now as well.
You mentioned the link between Hamas and Gaza, but is there no West Bank Hamas connection? So, I mean, what?
Yeah, so the West Bank has a different government, a different party in power, and that is Fatah, which is the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization is now called Fatah, and they're the party in power in the West Bank. Fatah is a much more moderate party, we'll say, than Hamas, and actually, in many ways, is controlled by the Israeli government's influence in a lot of ways. They basically will do what the Israelis say they have to do. So there's a big divide in that sense. But on the other hand, there is some connection, of course, because they are still both Palestinian. And so therefore, what very often will happen is that the Israeli military will be trying to take over more land in the West Bank or East Jerusalem that are Palestinian. Hamas will see that, and then Hamas will start sending over the rockets, which, as I said before, usually are not very powerful. This situation is an exception to the rule, but they'll start sending those rockets, and then that's when Israel will start really bombing Gaza. So, there is, of course, connection there because it is all Palestinian land, but it's two different political parties that are in power. Hamas is in Gaza and the Fatah is in the West Bank.
How do you feel about this, let's say, narrative in the West these last few days with the attacks in several European countries that has created in many people the urge to say, I don't want to get involved with what is happening to that part of the world if I'm not safe in my own house, like so many miles away. And they just want the whole thing to go away, which is understandable because it's not a little thing to walk in your city and get killed by a terrorist action. So what do you think about that? I mean, the whole complicated thing of the war against the non-believers.
So basically, I want to make sure I'm understanding. So you're talking about Europeans or people in the West at large who basically are saying that, they're kind of worried that this is going to spark terrorist attacks. So we're talking about Muslim terrorist attacks on European cities or Western cities, right?
Yes.
I mean, I think that, that attitude. So first of all, we've already had a very severe terrorist attack in the US. And
Yes.
it was not a Muslim attacking Americans, we'll say, or non-Muslim Americans. It was a white American man attacking Muslims, and he attacked, this is so horrendous, a mother and a 6-year-old boy. And I mean, the boy was like trying to hug him, from what I heard, you know, trying to say, please, please don't attack us. And he killed the child, and then he tried to kill the mother. And actually, it's not being reported in the news here, but I just heard that they are Palestinian and they're from the West
Yeah,
Bank.
that's what I read, that they are Palestinians.
Right, right. So, you know, it's like, why are they assuming that the terrorist attack is going to be that way around? Or do they not consider something like what I described to be a terrorist attack? You know, because, I mean, that's a terrorist attack as far as I'm concerned.
It is.
Huh?
It is, but it seems
Yeah.
that's happening both ways, that we have like people killing in the name of a god, a different god, but same action.
Well, really, they may use the name of the god, but really what is going on here, I mean, the terrorism is the response to Western imperialism in that part of the world. And so, you know, this idea of, oh, well, I just don't want to know about it, you know, and I just don't want anybody attacking me. It's like, well, you know, I mean, of course, I have to bring up the privilege issue here, right? You have the privilege of just kind of, you know, blocking that out. But the reality is that this is an ongoing thing that Western governments are doing to the Muslim world. You know, I mean, you have the US that invaded and occupied Iraq, invaded and occupied Afghanistan. You know, you have the NATO countries. I mean, England was involved in Afghanistan too, but, you know, you have the NATO countries that bombed Libya. You know, you have them in Syria. You have them, you have the US backing the Saudi genocide in Yemen, which is, according to the UN, the worst genocide since the Holocaust. Nobody knows about that. Nobody talks about that. Nobody cares about that. You have the US, you know, in their global war of terror, bombing Somalia, bombing Pakistan. You know, I mean, I can go on and on and on. The war in Sudan, the US is involved in that too. You know, so I mean, and I'm just saying the US, but like it's NATO as well, and it's Europe as well. So, you know, it's like, you can't, just like the Israelis, you know, they wanted to kind of like shut out, block out what Israel is doing to Gaza, what it's doing to the West Bank, what it's doing to the Palestinians. And they just wanted to kind of block that out and have their fun and have their party, you know, just a few miles away from the world's biggest open air concentration camp of Gaza. You can't keep blocking that out. It's going to, that violence is going to create more violence, and it is going to encroach on you in the end. And you are going to suffer from it in the end. I mean, this is like the oldest story in the book. Violence begets violence. It's like oppression begets violence. So when you have this status quo of violence that only affects some people, eventually it will affect all people. And, you know, this is what I've spoken about before with the whole concept of total liberation, is this realization that I think we all need to have, that, you know, the harm that is done to one eventually affects everyone. So when you are oppressing others, or your country, your government is oppressing others, everyone's going to suffer out of that in the end. You will suffer out of that in the end, one way or another too. And I actually just saw a young 19-year-old Israeli who was at that music festival, and she gave she did a video where she talked about that, and she said, her name is Little Rock, she goes by, and she said, you know, basically that. She was like, yeah, you know, this is, we have to realize that these governments don't care about any of us, and basically build solidarity among the people. The people are the people. And so, yeah, I mean, basically that's, you can't separate yourself from it like that.
What do you think will happen, and what do you wish could happen?
Well,
I'm
I
sure they are
mean,
very different scenarios.
yeah, they're very
Yeah,
different
well, yeah,
scenarios because I am very worried about what will happen. I mean, I'm extremely worried because, this situation does not seem to be getting any better. Maybe there will be a ceasefire this time and maybe there won't be, but the situation is not obviously going to be resolved. And I'm also really concerned about this situation with them saying that Iran has armed Hamas this time because, the attack that Hamas launched was far more sophisticated than they have ever been able to do before. And so now there's this idea that Iran may have armed Hamas, which would mean that Israel doesn't just have war with Hamas, it has war with Iran. And then, of course, the U.S. would have to back that, obviously, because the U.S. is so tied in with Israel. And, Iran, on the other hand, has very strong ties to Russia and China. And in fact, I just read that a month ago, that connection between Iran, Russia, and China stepped up even more. So, they would have that backing. And, so I could really see this like flaring up into a major global war situation involving all the world's superpowers. There's also something going on. Iran is allegedly now going to enter the situation. Yeah, so I mean, this could get really uglier and uglier and uglier. And I also, Ukraine has been making overtures to Israel. So, there's that in the mix. And then there's also something called the mega deal. And the mega deal is a deal that originally Trump started, but Biden has been continuing to try to broker this deal where the U.S. would give more weapons to Saudi Arabia and some of the other Gulf states in exchange for those states recognizing Israel and also forming a military alliance with Israel, so that if there were such a war situation, you'd have those countries jumping in with Israel. They'd have to if they take that deal. You'd have the U.S. with Israel. You'd have Ukraine with Israel. You'd have, I'm sure Europe and NATO and all of that. And then you'd have Iran and you'd have China and you'd have Russia. And, so, I mean, this really could flare up into a very, very serious war, even beyond a regional conflict necessarily, or regional war. So I'm really scared about all of this. Yeah,
Laura, that I was watching George Galloway, and whatever we might think of him, very controversial character, obviously, but he was kind of hinting that there might be a lot of things going on in the background to actually calm things down in Israel because of this kind of domino effect that you've just talked about. And saying that, do you realize that if you go ahead with what you keep saying you're going to do, then it's going to mean this, then it's going to mean that, and then it's going to mean the other, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is. It's a really serious situation. And I think that is a possibility. Although from what we've been hearing from Biden here in the U.S., all we're hearing is, we have to stand with Israel and we have to give $8 billion more of military aid to Israel. Israel already gets $3.5 billion of U.S. taxpayer money a year, and now they just got $8 billion more. So, we're not hearing anything like that. But yeah, if they are wise, I would say that would be the best course of action because, yes, it could get very serious. So those are some potential situations. Another, of course, potential is that Egypt opens up that border at Rafah. The Gazans pour out of there. Israel shuts the border, and the Gazans are then in Egypt. Jordan is 60 to 80% Palestinian because of this sort of thing happening in the past. So it's very possible that this could happen with Egypt. So, I mean, there's various scenarios, or they just call a ceasefire, but then, you've got Gaza still under blockade and all of the conditions that created this situation for Hamas to go and do this in the first place. So none of these are good options. As far as what I would want to see happen, like I mentioned earlier, this is just my personal opinion. I'm not speaking on behalf of Plant the Land. Plant the Land is all Palestinian other than me, really. And I can't speak for them, but just for me personally, I would want to see something more along the lines maybe of a communalist solution, which is, different communities living with self-governance and not necessarily having some kind of nation state overall, which was actually, of course, originally Palestine was not a nation state. And you also had the Jewish anarchists who, their idea was just to emigrate over there. The anarchists that were in favor of Jews emigrating to Palestine, their idea was to emigrate there. That's actually where the, kibbutz movement started in some ways. But not, there was a wing of the original Zionist movement, believe it or not, of people who were saying, let's not have, we shouldn't be creating a country. We shouldn't be creating a nation state with a government and all of that. We should just live there, basically as immigrants, alongside the existing population of Palestinians and live there peacefully. And those people, a lot of them pulled out of the Zionist movement when they saw that it was going in the nation state direction. So, I would say, I am more of a no state solution person.
You
but,
anarchist,
yeah.
you anarchist. But
yeah,
those ones you were talking about, just kind of acting as immigrants and just being quite happy about that. Are there many of those left, or what?
No, so that was way back. We're talking about when the Zionist movement first started, and it was just, a dream for them. You had a section of people that were saying, because they wanted to get out of Europe, of course, because, Europe was obviously persecuting the Jews. But they were anarchists, or, they were leftists. Some of them were, Bundists, as they called them, or, and they basically said, well, socialists, and they said, well, we do want to move there, but we don't want to do anything disruptive. We just want to live there side by side with the existing society. We don't want to take it over. And those people, when they realized that it was the political Zionist wing that was gaining the power and that it was going to go in that direction, a lot of them just kind of washed their hands of the whole thing. And, they said, we want to distance ourselves from this now. We don't want to be a part of this. We don't agree with it.
Well, that almost suggests if it had been the other way around, all this wouldn't have happened almost.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Now, as this is a vegan show, of course, and let's get back to maybe our focus of veganism and just finish with some more little stories about other animals, because this is feeding feral or free living cats, I believe, and this is the Palestine Animal League. I think the picture on the left, at least, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
So actually the one on the right is Sulala, and that is them helping a cat who was injured in a previous Israeli bombing attack. And the one on the left, yes, is the Palestinian Animal League, and they are a very interesting organization because they are, number one, a vegan organization. And they actually had a vegan cafe for a while at a university, Al Khud University in the West Bank. And the university was they actually agreed to not only let them have the cafe there, but to donate half of all proceeds to Palestinian Animal League for their animal rescue efforts. And the Palestinian Animal League also, they have a kind of a similar goal in some ways to Daily Hugs, that they want to heal the relationship between the Palestinians and especially the children and the non-human animals. And Ahmed Safdi, the founder of Palestinian Animal League, he said that he originally thought of the idea because he was in, I think it was Jenin refugee camp. And so, you know, Palestinians are living in refugee camps in their own homeland because they've been pushed out of, you know, through ongoing Israeli colonization and, you know, taking more land. They've been pushed out of where they were living, and then they end up in refugee camps, even though they're in their own homeland. So he was in Jenin refugee camp, and he saw these children in the camp, and they were abusing the animals. They were like hitting the dogs and everything. And he knew that the reason why was because they were just so full of trauma from living under Israeli military occupation and settler colonialism and apartheid and the brutality from the settlers, just all of it combined, that, you know, and they felt so powerless, and then they were taking it out on someone who was even less powerful than they were. So he realized, you know, I want to help them to connect with, to care for the non-human animals, and to, you know, realize that they can be their friends, and they can really provide a lot of comfort to them, and that they can have that bond with them. And so that was really how he started Palestinian Animal League. Again, was for the non-human animals and also for the children as well.
Yeah, that would certainly be interesting sociologically if that kind of affection for other animals in children was to go, because it's bad enough when the children who do have this affection grow up, as it were, and then start being slaughterhouse workers and everything. If they didn't have it in the first place, it would be quite an interesting kind of thing. Anyway, there's a couple of pictures to go. So now this is two separate ventures here, Laura.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one of those photos is, again, from Daily Hugs. That's a German Shepherd. And like I said, the German Shepherds in particular, Daily Hugs focuses on, because there's a lot of exploitation of German Shepherds by the Israeli military. And then you also have there's a Bethlehem animal rescue organization. So Bethlehem is actually in the Palestinian West Bank. And so the woman on the left, she is involved in animal rescue in that area.
Okay.
It seems that they are doing a lot with very limited resources and under very difficult circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
You have from what we've seen, they have several organizations caring for protecting animals.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's really amazing that, you know, I was really happy to find the organizations that I did find when I was writing that article, because I was like, you know, again, how much resources and time and just bandwidth do Palestinians have to really look out for the non-human animals when they are going through so much themselves? But there are quite a few people who really care about them. And actually, I really want to mention also my friend Susanna Zorko. I didn't have any photos to include in that article of the work that she's doing, but she's in El Azariah, just outside Jerusalem in the West Bank. And she is really doing so much to help the homeless dogs and the cats in that area. And she's a huge human rights activist as well, but she really, you know, she is kind of a total liberationist in that sense. She really cares about humans and other animals and the ecology and everything. The other thing I wanted to mention is about Palestinian Animal League. They had a conference a few years ago, and it was a really amazing conference. It was for people all over the world, animal rights activists and vegans all over the world, to come to Palestine, to the West Bank, and have a conversation about the interrelationship of human, animal, and earth liberation. So it was very total liberationist. And then they, of course, also took them around and showed them what life was like under Israeli military occupation, colonization, apartheid, etc. And what was really interesting about that as well is that I saw the banner advertising that conference, and it really stayed with me because it said, you know, we're going to be looking at the impacts of colonization on the people, the animals, and the land. And I was like, wow, you know, that was a very early stage of me seeing it kind of framed in that way of let's look at everything and everyone that is impacted by colonization from a multi-species solidarity framework.
Sounds good. You got a follow-up, Nella? Or?
No, I was just thinking that it's already late, and I was wondering how difficult the night is going to be for the people in Gaza.
Yeah, it's going to be severe because that's when they do the heaviest bombing, is always at night. And of course, they have no electricity, and they're freezing because it's, you know, getting into late October, and it's the desert, which is very cold at night, and they don't have blankets. So, and they're packed in, you know, I mean, like I said, Anas is staying in an apartment with 50 people in it, all huddled in there in the freezing cold, no water, no electricity, and heavily being bombed, because the heaviest bombing always happens at night. So yeah, the nights are the worst right now.
You know, you don't think of deserts being cold at night, do you?
Oh, they are during the night, yes.
Yeah.
Hot in the day, and during the night they are very cold.
Yeah.
Well, this is the last picture we can maybe comment on, and then we can go. The look of patience on the dog's face struck me, actually, because obviously this dog, he's in quite a bad state, the looks of it, but it looks quite accepting of the fact that seems to realize that the humans are trying to help or something like that, maybe.
Oh yeah, I definitely think that he is aware of that. You know, that these are people that care and they're trying to help him. And that's Sulala as well. That's Sulala Animal Rescue in Gaza.
That looks like his back leg has been severed or something, because they've got that kind of purple spray that you use, you know, on goats, for example, when you trim their hoofs and stuff. So
yeah.
Right. Well, any last words, Nella, or should we get going?
Yeah. I was about to say, like, a few seconds back, that we should pray for those suffering, but I think that religions and praying brought us here in the first place. So that's my personal opinion, of course.
We should fight for those suffering, perhaps. Well, Laura, thanks very much for doing this at short notice. You've been a star as usual, a font of knowledge. It's like talking to Wikipedia, really, isn't it, Nella? So,
Oh, yes, yes. And this is an immensely complicated issue, topic. I mean, even if you want to look at the maps, you have to bring several maps and examine them throughout the years, and the names change, and the borders change, and everything changes. So, and you have all these wars and all these agreements and propositions and hopeful situations, and then war again.
Yeah.
Well, here's a question, and I'm a bit reluctant to ask it at this stage, but given this renewed violence between humans, where does it leave us with the expectation of a vegan world? Is it a nail in the coffin, or is it we're just in a process, or what?
I mean, I feel like what is going on with that is that we are just going to reach a tipping point. I mean, it's like escalating and escalating and escalating. And meanwhile, it's like this can't hold. You know, the climate is not going to be able to handle all of this, and humanity is not going to be able to handle all of this. And you know, it's just it's going to come to a point where either people have to wake up and realize that this is leading us all into extinction, or we go that route, you know? So, I mean, to me, it's like, I can't think of anything more important than to be in a total liberationist movement right now. You know, I mean, we need to really, and I'm starting to see it with like some people, that there is starting to be some kind of an awareness of, you know, this bigger picture, this holistic understanding of, you know, the violence that we do to other animals then reverberates back onto us, you know, through the impact on climate, through, you know, what it does to us even psychologically, you know. I mean, there's just like, so it's a really tall order. It's the challenge of our lifetime. It's the challenge of any lifetime. I mean, that's honestly how I would put it, is it is the challenge of humanity. But I feel like it's now or never. You know, if any time would be the time that people might listen, it's now, because the world is collapsing, and, you know, ecosystems are collapsing, and everything is at stake right now. The future of the human race, the future of life on Earth, everything is at stake right now. So if ever there were a time that we need to say it, we need to work towards it, we need to really be building towards that future, it's like our only chance, it's our only hope. It's do or die, basically. So that's kind of how I'm seeing it.
The time of veganism is now. Somebody ought to write a lecture based on that, which is one of my titles. But yeah, I mean, like the founders of the vegan social movement, one of the main planks of their position is that veganism would get us out of a moral trough, and it would be part and parcel of the moral evolution of humanity. And I think you're right, Laura. We need it more now than ever before. It's just, I'm wondering whether, you know, I try to keep optimistic, as people know if they know me, but of late I'm wondering, you know, because do we as a species have the smarts to get ourselves out of this? I'm just wondering, you know.
Yeah, that's the real test of our smarts, isn't it?
Yes.
If you fail, you die.
Yes. Let's bring on the smarts.
Right. I mean, all this stuff about, oh, humans are the most intelligent animal. Ooh, I mean, we can't even like figure out the most basic, you know, obvious solution to our existential crisis that we're having here as a species. Yeah. So I hope so. But I do think that, you know, if veganism is presented in a total liberationist framework, I can certainly speak for me personally that I've always been, you know, a leftist, and always, you know, even before I went vegan, I was vegetarian for a long time. I thought that was the thing to do if you're an animal rights activist. But, you know, I've always had an animal rights inclination, and I've always had a human rights inclination and an environmentalist inclination, but didn't really start understanding the interrelationship between those things on a much deeper level until I actually did go vegan. And then, you know, through the vegan movement and through total liberationist conceptions of veganism, my mind expanded. It's like that meme that we always see, you know, being passed around, where it's like, you know, the little tiny brain, and then, you know, an idea enters and it, you know, grows a little bit, lights up, and then, you know, at the end, it's like absolutely flourishing and a ball of light. I do feel that veganism can have that effect if it is presented in a total liberationist way and understanding it in a deeper way.
Yeah, well said. I totally agree with that, and I think we should end with this idea that we are all human animals, aren't we? In fact, I do know you. I think you posted something on Facebook to that effect, Laura, yesterday. I think maybe. But, yes.
Yeah.
Well, people. Thanks very much for sticking with us, and it was very impromptu. We decided to do it today, and Laura graciously came on board, and Nella too. So I'm very grateful for all that. So we'll see you again. What have we got planned, Nella? For we've got another I'm Right show pretty soon, haven't we? I think in the pipeline.
We have, yes, but
Yes.
it's a surprise. The topic is a surprise.
Oh, okay, right. Okay, so a surprise and right show coming up soon. So until then, people, we'll say goodbye, and thanks again, Laura. You've been brilliant, and bye for now, everyone.
And thank you. And